In the 1840s, hopeful American and British lovers sent lacy valentines with cursive flourishes and lofty poems by the thousands. But what to do if you didn't love the person who had set their eyes on you? In the Victorian era, there was no better way to let someone know they were unwanted than with the ultimate insult, the Vinegar Valentine. Also called comic valentines, these unwelcome notes were sometimes crass and always emotionally damaging in the anti-spirit of Valentine's Day. Vinegar Valentines were cheeky postcard decorated with a caricature and insulting poem, a lampoon of Valentine's Day cards. The unflattering novelty items enjoyed a century of popularity beginning in the 1840s during the Victorian era. These cynical, sarcastic, often mean-spirited cards were first produced in America by a variety of printing companies including Elton, Fisher, Strong, and Turner. By the 1870s, other entrepreneurs such as New York printer John McLaughlin and his cartoonist Charles Howard were creating their own lines of cards. While different European companies also produced the humorous cards, in the early 19th century, one of the most prestigious firms to create them around 1900 was Raphael Tuck and Sons, publishers to Their Majesties the King and Queen of England. Raphael Tuck and Sons was a business started by Raphael Tuck and his wife in Bishopsgate in the City of London in 1866, selling pictures and greeting cards and eventually selling postcards, which was their most successful line. Their business was one of the best known in the postcard boom of the late 1800s and early 1900s. Their contributions left a lasting effect on most of the artistic world. Sadly, during the Blitz, the company headquarters Raphael House was destroyed, including the originals for most of their series, and the company never fully recovered. Raphael was married to the former Ernestine Listener in March 1848. She gave birth to 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls, all born in Prussia prior to their migration to England. As the family of 7 children grew older, the children provided more help to the business. Raphael sent out his sons Hermann, Adolf, and Gustav to bring in more business. Hermann and Adolf also went on selling trips, and at the end of the day, they would check the result of the day's work. The one with the highest sales would have the bigger egg next morning for breakfast. Cheaply made, Vinegar Valentines were usually printed on one side of a single sheet of paper and cost only a penny. Some people mistakenly call them penny dreadfuls, but that term refers to a form of potboiler fiction. They often featured garish caricatures of men like the Dude or women like the Floozy. One reason they rapidly became popular throughout America and Europe was because literacy rates were rising at the time among poor and working classes, who rarely had much money than a penny to spend on such luxuries. But according to Nancy Rosing, president of the National Valentine Collectors Association, their use wasn't restricted to the lower economic classes. The unflattering cards reportedly created a stir throughout all social levels, sometimes provoking fisticuffs and arguments. The receiver, not the sender, was responsible for the cost of postage up until the 1840s. A person in those days paid for the privilege of being insulted by an often anonymous admirer. Millions of Vinegar Valentines with verses that insulted a person's looks, intelligence, or occupation were sold between the 19th and 20th centuries. The cards are usually simply a sheet of thin, colored paper, about the size of a modern greeting card. They were later also produced in the form of postcards. They were usually sent anonymously. Postmasters sometimes confiscated these cards as unfit to be mailed. Cameron C. Nichols wrote that Vinegar Valentines were tasteless, even vulgar, and was sent to drunks, shrews, bachelors, old maids, dandies, flirts, and penny pinchers, and the like. He added that in 1847, sales between love-minded Valentines and these sour notes were split at a major New York Valentine publisher. The women's suffrage movement of the late 19th and early 20th century brought another class of Vinegar Valentines, targeting women who fought for the right to vote. While only a small percentage of mean-spirited cards were devoted to suffragettes, Kenneth Flory argues in American Woman's Suffrage Postcards that it is clear from their context that an interest in women's rights was an inherent part of one's distorted personality. These cards depicted such women as ugly abusers. It isn't known whether they were sent directly to troll women's rights activists or if they were sent to like-minded friends who disagreed with the movement. Suffragists did have their own pro-women's rights Valentines to pass around on February 14th. Flory wrote that one threw shade on anti-suffragists with the phrase, "No vote, no kiss." But in light of the supposed unattractiveness of suffragists, according to men, many 19th century women enticed their would-be lovers by sending cards that denied support of the women's rights cause. One of these cards, quoted by Flory, depicted a pretty woman surrounded by hearts, with a plain appeal. "In these wild days of suffragette drays, I'm sure you'd never overlook a girl who can't be militant, but simply loves to cook." Many Vinegar Valentines from the 19th century were drawn by Charles Howard, who put ridiculous caricatures of the sorry recipient in full color. An issue of Kindergarten Primary Magazine from 1895 worried about the moral implications of these cards for children. A teacher from Iowa wrote that she staved off the desire to send vulgar Valentines by telling students stories from St. Valentine's treacherous life. The magazine said that teachers must do what they could to help make it a day for kind remembrance than a day for wreaking revenge. Valentines and Vinegar Valentines alike were once a booming business. In 1905, San Francisco, 25,000 Valentines were delayed because of overworked clerks. The more surly cards weren't always welcomed by postmasters. However, another 25,000 Valentines were held in a Chicago post office for being unfit to send due to the many rude and vinegar Valentines in the hall. As Valentines declined in lieu of expensive dinners or gifts, the Vinegar Valentine became less popular, though in some locations in the 1970s they were still selling well. While some might mourn the romantic February 14th of the past with its long poems and declarations of love, it's also much less likely we'll get a nasty note in the mail as a Valentine's surprise.